Purchase College, where I studied art history and printmaking.
So far?
Well, right now it's a sort of crossroads because this is a departure from my last show, which was called Sighthound. It's based off of one specific piece that depicted an animal on its own, which was the dog, which was received as the antagonist in the overarching story, when my actual I think where the piece was for me was that it was a single character depicted on his own as opposed to the antagonist. And the actual antagonist, if there were to be one, would be the human who choreographed the hair coursing event as opposed to the dog who is acting on instinct. So this is At Rest, is a series of work that is an expansion of that one piece, which is called Anatole, which I have a second title for it, which is also At Rest. It is the animal on its own, and I try to depict it in a vacuum, so that way it is a distillation of the form, and you can see the whippet on its own. At Rest is an extension of a previous body of work that I did in 2016 called Sighthound, which was a suite of prints done in intaglio and silkscreen, which depicted various scenes from the popular game sport called hair coursing. Within that suite, there was one silkscreen print that depicted a single whippet, which is this breed of dog, which is most commonly used in hair coursing on its own. And the way that print was received was that the whippet seemed to be seen as the antagonist as opposed to a single character in kind of the allegory that is hair coursing. What I was actually talking about in that suite was about power dynamics and the idea of human spectacle and how things are organized and how characters within this allegory will affect each other. So what I wanted to do with this suite was I wanted to expand on that. And At Rest is me focusing on one character. So in this series, I work in a way that is research-based, and I end up using the research as a framework for an allegory, which is basically everything is a metaphor for general interaction. And I ended up going through a lot of the history of whippets as a breed. My work is research-based, and in my research I study the history of whippets as a breed and how they progressed in becoming a breed, starting in medieval England, to how they are used today in game sports, and how they are understood as pets. Which there's a series of dichotomies in the animal's personality, as well as how it is perceived and stigmatized because it is a part of such a controversial sport.
As you're resenting the saying of going too far the other way. No! Pendulum has swung past the point of balance.
No, she's fucking tired of him.
No, she's totally
What's going on?
As you're presenting it, I had the she's cool. Oh, no, you're lit.
Dante was like, where?
He's in there.
The reason why I chose to work on campus for this week is because I wanted to engage more with the subject as opposed to printmaking, which can be a much quicker medium the way I was working with it. I did very simple prints, like just 2 layers with one a kind of very illustrative one, whereas this I ended up sitting with the subject a lot longer, and I ended up learning more about the subject that I was working with in that process.
So you could say that painting was a more intimate choice for you than with printmaking? Okay.
Yes, I ended up spending a lot more time with each subject as a result of that, and I felt that I had a much better understanding of what I was working with than I did at the end of the print. And I hadn't painted in many years, and this was a completely different experience than I had before. Especially coming from a printmaker's perspective, this felt a lot more like an investigation as opposed to a depiction of the subject.
Can you explain more why you choose the word investigation? Because that comes up in your statement for the show as well.
Yeah, I choose the word investigation because it seems to be kind of trying to unravel something that is a lot more obvious of what the subject is in itself and how that subject can be perceived in when the context is removed and within the context that it usually dwells in.
Is that the reason behind the background, the floating quality?
Yes. I wanted to depict the whippets in as little information as I could, because I wanted them to stand on their own, because they have a very complicated and rich history of how they became a breed and how they exist right now in popular game sports, and it's very hard to come across the specific breed of dog without either coming across animal rights stigma or very positive associations of how they behave in the home as pets.
You previously had a show at Space 776 titled Sighthounds. How does that relate to your recent exhibition, seeing as Sighthound was a collection or suite of prints and At Rest is a suite of paintings?
Well, this is an expansion upon one theme that was a very big part of Sighthound, in that I wanted to depict characters in an allegory, and the allegory in this case was hair coursing and how that can translate into power dynamics as a whole. So this is just various iterations of one character in that allegory. And the reason why I chose to work in painting as opposed to print this time is because I wanted to have a much more intimate interaction with the subject, where I spend much more time with each piece, and it's a much slower way of working, and I felt that I was getting to know the subject even better than I did when I was. This feels a lot more like an exposure as opposed to just illustrating something.
You say exposure.
Yeah, the image ended up revealing itself to me much more than I was trying to articulate it. It was much more of an interactive process, even though I was the person who's making the image. I work from photographs, so I ended up getting to know each photograph very, very well towards the end of it, and it was a very slow and very rewarding process.
Would you say that you have a form of a relationship with each painting? Does a certain painting elicit a different emotion than another painting while you're working on it or after it's completed?
It did feel that way as I was working on each one, but once I actually saw them all in the space, I realized how exposing they were in one piece, because I didn't anticipate how much of my choice of the individual photographs would say, there's a shyness to them that I didn't recognize at first. There's something very protective about each one, and I realized how exposed the figures really are once they're all up on white walls, as opposed to in my studio, because I see them as pieces and I see them as objects that need to be finished.
Mm-hmm.
And then I realized how much of myself I really poured into them, and that is something that is simultaneously very exposing, yet it is also very rewarding because it feels sort of like an exorcism as opposed to a construction.
And you say photographs. Did you hunt for photographs of these dogs, or did you happen upon them?
I have a cousin who happened to have a whippet who she had a very close relationship with. Unfortunately, the dog had passed away, but she gave me the rights to these photographs, and it was, she also cared a lot about the history of the breed, which is what attracted her to it, and her relationship with the dog in the home told a lot about what the temperament is and kind of the dichotomy that exists in these dogs, because they are bred to hunt, yet they are notoriously sedentary and are very, very sweet and loyal animals. So it really it contributed to the different planes of existence that these one subjects can have, because they're most commonly today, in this part of the world, seen as pets as opposed to hunting dogs. So to see them as kind of fixtures in people's homes and as very positive influences was very interesting to me, because what I was reading about in my research was seeing them as these kind of vicious killers and hunters, and I really enjoyed that this one subject can have these two different sides.
So building on the previous body of work, Sighthound, now that you've completed another body of work, completely changing mediums, and while simultaneously carrying over an allegory from one show to the next, where do you see this within your greater body of work, and where do you see yourself continuing with having completed this, either continuing allegorically or medium-wise, or pivoting towards something different?
Well, right now I actually feel like I'm a bit of a crossroads, because I think that I might have maximized my just my capacity to work with this one theme at this point. However, I do think that I will continue to work in a way that is research-based and a way that is allegorical, because there's an element of removal when working with research and allegory that allows you for more interpretive flexibility as opposed to depicting something head-on. And I might delve into abstraction a little bit more, because towards the end of the suite, actually with pieces like this covered, I wanted to actually bring the form down to something that might not even be perceived as a whippet at all. And I found a lot of freedom in that, because I was able to communicate a mood and a state with mostly color and form as opposed to outright illustrating the figure itself. And that was something that offered me a lot of creative freedom, and I think I would continue working with that. And I've never delved into abstraction before in a way that I was comfortable and satisfied with the way that it looked until this suite, the end of this suite, which is when I was starting to become, I was starting to reach more for what is the true essence of what I'm trying to say, as opposed to getting distracted with details of the musculature of the left leg, and I'm not doing that anymore. And I think that is a lesson that I learned that I would like to carry forward, and it's a completely different way of working for me, because I've never been able to let go of detail that much before.
Well, thank you for doing this interview, and best of luck with the rest of your work.
Thank you so much for having me.